In campaign after campaign, Tiglath-Pileser conquered lands in Syria and marched all the way down the Mediterranean coast, taking coastal cities all the way to Egypt. He invaded the northern kingdom of Israel, destroyed their army, installed a puppet king, and deported large numbers of Hebrew tribes back to lands in Assyria.
Shalom, Kahala Yahweh, Ba'Shem Yahushai, Ba'Shem Ruach Kodash. Double honors my teachers, the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Peace and mercy to the elect, who are the house of David, reborn again in this generation. And shalom to the 130 Yasharallah, who today are known as the Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, who before losing our true heritage, we were known as, and still are, the true Hebrew Israelites of the Holy Bible. In today's lesson, we're going to go a little bit back into our ancient history, namely of the Northern Kingdom. That would be the so-called Latinos and the so-called Native American Indians' ancient history, before we had come over here on the Western Hemisphere, all right, known as the Americas, right? Before we arrived here, we were known as the Israelites, or the Hebrew Israelites of the Northern Kingdom. That same Hebrew Israelite nation, which was described here in this biography video of the, or documentary video of the Assyrians, which was referred to as a great nation back in those days, right? And this wasn't a surprise attack, not to us at least, right? Us Northern Kingdom Israelites, because why? Well, because it was prophesied onto us that this would happen, okay? And we're going to get into a little bit of further history by reading the book of Judith, which took place before this eventual taking down of the Northern Kingdom. But let's read this first. This is 1 Kings 9 and 7. Then will I cut off Israel out of the land which I gave them, and this house which I have hallowed for my name will I cast out of my sight, and Israel shall be a proverb and a byword among all people. And that's exactly what happened, right? The Northern Kingdom, because of our wickedness and how we would go off and stop obeying the laws which the Lord commanded us, right? And this ultimately happened, because the kings who had reigned over us in the Northern Kingdoms, Jeroboam, for example, he was the first Ephraimite king of the Northern Kingdom. He had set up 2 golden calves, or calves for us to worship, because he feared that the inhabitants of the Northern Kingdom would, when they would go to venture down to the Southern Kingdom, to the temple, to observe the Passover and everything, that we would basically stick with them and not go back to the Northern Kingdom. So what did the rulership do? Well, like I said, they set up those 2 golden calves, and they basically started setting up their own ways and own laws, and they even made anybody, they basically made other people of other tribes the priest, right? When back then it was decreed that only the Levites were able to administer the laws of the Lord, right, and perform all the rituals. But these images that you're seeing here, from the, putting us Israelites on spikes, to, casting us, away, we're being driven out of the land, these are historic reliefs of what took place, right? How we were basically tortured and carried away out of the land of Israel and taken into Assyria, okay? So here you go. And again, back then, the Northern Kingdom, we didn't look as light-skinned as we do today, right? We pretty much looked like so-called black people back then too. Maybe a little bit lighter, but it wasn't until way into the future, about another close to 2,000 years, from, what was it, like 16 to 2,000 years later, when we would be discovered by the Europeans over here in America, that we would be destroyed and take on the phenotype appearances of our captors, right? Back in this time, we still had the appearances of the Southern Kingdom, right? To some aspect, because again, when you read the Bible, it also tells you that we also would marry amongst the other heathen nations around us, right? That's where you get into the parable stories of Ahala and Ahalaba, which was a parable of two sisters that went a whoring with lovers, right? But it basically was an analogy for the southern and northern kingdom. But let's read this, because this is eventually what ended up happening, right? Or actually, before we read this, I want you to hear, from the Israelite historian Flavius Josephus, the accounts of chapter 14. It tells you, it says, how Salmanasar took Samaria, right? Samaria is the northern kingdom, because Samaria was our capital city back then, by force, and how he transplanted the 10 tribes into Medea, right, Iran, and brought the nation of the Kuthians into the country in their room. So let's listen to this.
Chapter 14. How Shalmaneser took Syria by force, and how he transplanted the 10 tribes into Media, and brought the nation of the Kuthians into their country in their room. When Shalmaneser, the king of Assyria, had it told him that Hoshea, the king of Israel, had sent privately to So, the king of Egypt, desiring his assistance against him, he was very angry, and made an expedition against Samaria in the 7th year of the reign of Hoshea. But when he was not admitted into the city by the king, he besieged Samaria 3 years, and took it by force in the 9th year of the reign of Hoshea, and in the 7th year of Hezekiah, king of Jerusalem, and quite demolished the government of the Israelites, and transplanted all the people into Media and Persia, among whom he took King Hoshea alive. And when he had removed these people out of this their land, he transplanted other nations out of Cutha, a place so called, for there is still a river of that name in Persia, into Samaria, and into the country of the Israelites. So the 10 tribes of the Israelites were removed out of Judea. The tribes of the Israelites were removed out of Judea 947 years after their forefathers were come out of the land of Egypt, and possessed themselves of the country, but 800 years after Joshua had been their leader, and as I have already observed, 240 years, 7 months, and 7 days after they had revolted from Rehoboam, the grandson of David, and had given the kingdom to Jeroboam. And such a conclusion overtook the Israelites when they had transgressed the laws, and would not hearken to the prophets, who foretold that this calamity would come upon them, if they would not leave off their evil doings. What gave birth to these evil doings was that sedition which they raised against Rehoboam, the grandson of David, when they set up Jeroboam his servant to be their king, when, by sinning against God, and bringing them to imitate his bad example, made God to be their enemy, while Jeroboam underwent that punishment which he justly deserved. And now the king of Assyria invaded all Syria and Phoenicia in a hostile manner. The name of this king is also set down in the archives of Tyre, for he made an expedition against Tyre in the reign of Elulius, and Meander attests to it, who, when he wrote his chronology, and translated the archives of Tyre into the Greek language, gives us the following history. One whose name was Elulius reigned 36 years. This king, upon the revolt of the Scythians, sailed to them and reduced them again to a submission. Against these did the king of Assyria send an army, and in a hostile manner overrun all Phoenicia, but soon made peace with them all, and returned back. But Sidon and Ace and Palsetyrus revolted, and many other cities there were which delivered themselves up to the king of Assyria. Accordingly, would not submit to him, the king returned, and fell upon them again, while the Phoenicians had furnished him with 80 ships, and 800 men to row them. And when the Tyrians had come upon them in 12 ships, and the enemy's ships were dispersed, they took 500 men prisoners, and the reputation of all the citizens of Tyre was thereby increased. But the king of Assyria returned, and placed guards at their rivers and aqueducts, who should hinder the Tyrians from drawing water. This continued for 5 years, and still the Tyrians bore the siege, and drank of the water they had out of the wells they dug. And this is what is written in the Tyrian archives concerning Shalmaneser, the king of Assyria. But now the Cuthians, who removed to Samaria, for that is the name they had been called by to this time, because they were brought out of the country called Cutha, which is a country of Persia, and there is a river of the same name in it. Them, according to their nations, which were in number 5, brought their own gods into Samaria, and by worshipping them, as was the custom of their own countries, they provoked Almighty God to be angry and displeased at them, for a plague seized upon them, by which they were destroyed. And when they found no cure for their miseries, they learned by the oracle that they ought to worship Almighty God, as the method for their deliverance. So they sent ambassadors to the king of Assyria, and desired him to send them some of those priests of the Israelites whom he had taken captive. And when he thereupon sent them, and the people were by them taught the laws, and the holy worship of God, they worshipped him in a respectful manner, and the plague ceased immediately. And indeed they continue to make use of the very same customs to this very time, and are called in the Hebrew tongue Cutlans, but in the Greek tongue Samaritans. And when they see the Jews in prosperity, they pretend that they are changed, and allied to them, and call them kinsmen, as though they were derived from Joseph, and had by that means an original alliance with them. But when they see them falling into a low condition, they say they are no way related to them, and that the Jews have no right to expect any kindness or marks of kindred from them, but they declare that they are sojourners, that come from other countries. But of these we shall have a more seasonable opportunity to discourse hereafter.
So you just heard the historic events recorded of how us Latinos and Native Americans were kicked out of the northern kingdom of Israel, right? And we were taken into captivity, right? And after we had been taken out of that land, how our captors brought in Catlins or Kuthians, right? Who basically are Iranian people, right? People from Assyria or in the land of the Medes. They brought them into the northern kingdom, and they became known as the Sumerians, okay? And this is why when you hear the story of the Messiah speaking to the woman by the well, the Sumerian woman, that's not an Israelite. She's a heathen, right? She's a descendant of these Kuthians, which, like you heard in Josephus' writings, that they had kept the laws even till this day, because if they did not keep the laws, what would happen is they were basically getting plagued, right? We hear the story about how they were being attacked and killed by lions, but ultimately the leadership of the Assyrians had summoned back some Levite priests to explain to the Kuthians how to live in our land. Well, that being said, this is right here is the accounting of us being driven out in the Bible, right? This is Second Kings 17 and let's actually start here at verse 20. And Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahushai rejected all the seed of Israel. Israel is a reference to the northern kingdom, right? The kingdom of Israel, the Latino and the Native Americans, and afflicted them and delivered them into the hand of the spoilers being the Assyrians, until he cast them out of his sight. For he rent Israel out of the house of David, and they made Jeroboam the son of Nebat king, and Jeroboam drave Israel from following Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahushai, and made them sin a great sin, right? And that great sin was breaking of the first commandment, right? Which is, you shall have no other gods, before Yahweh, right? And Jeroboam did that by creating those 2 golden cows for us to worship, right? Verse 22, for the children of Israel walked in all the sins of Jeroboam, which he did. They departed not from them, until Yahweh, B'Shem Yahshai, removed Israel out of his sight, as he had said by all his servants, the prophets, right? And what we just read in 1 Kings was one of the, the prophecies that the Lord would whip us out of the land for not following his ways, right? And there's so many other scriptures there that explain that talk about this. So was Israel carried away out of their own land by Assyria unto this day. And the king of Assyria brought men from Babylon and from Cuth and from Ava and from Hamath and from Sepharvaim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel, and they possessed Samaria and dwelt in the cities thereof. And so it was at the beginning of the dwelling there that they feared not Yahweh B'Shem Yahshai. Therefore Yahweh sent lions amongst them, which slew some of them. Wherefore they spake to the king of Assyria, saying, the nations which thou hast removed and placed in the cities of Samaria know not the manner of the God of the land. Therefore he hath sent lions amongst them, and behold, they slay them, because they know not the manner of the God of the land. Right? And there you go. So this is another example too why the so-called Jewish people over in the land of Israel today, they still keep some of the customs, right? Because they know that if they don't, that they're going to be cursed and ultimately stricken by the Lord, right? Even though they're doing a lot of other abominable things, especially during this month of June, right? Now, that being said, so you just right here we just read the casting out of the northern kingdom, right? Now, let's go and read this book of Judith here, which again, it's a great chapter. And this right here, the book of Judith, she's a Simeonite, right? A so-called she would be a Dominican Republican, right? And the thing about Judith is she takes place before this initial taking down of the Northern Kingdom. Let's go to the Bible timeline so I can explain it real quick. So when you have, let's see, where is it at? So right here in 1722 BC is when the Northern Kingdom, we were ultimately kicked out of the land of Israel. But before that, about 12 years before that, you have the book of Judith, right? Where Assyria had come up against us and had tried to take us down back in that time, right? And then, but, through the actions that the Lord, or through the actions which the Lord put upon Judith to perform, we were saved, and we were given about another decade to reign in that land, right? We were given a bit of mercy, right? And what we're going to read real quick is an account of us, right? Of us Israelites, that this so-called Japanese man, this Ammonite, gave, right, to the Assyrian general called Heliophanes, who was commanded to come up against not only just us Israelites, but all the land of the Levant, right, the so-called Middle East. Because what happened is, when the Assyrian king had taken over, a lot of the nations didn't believe he had much power, right? They didn't really respect him. So he decided to basically put a campaign against all of his kingdom, right? And all the nations around, and ultimately destroy all their gods. And so that way it would force all the nations, right? The Babylonians, the Assyrians, and all the nations, even us Israelites, the Egyptians, all to worship the Assyrian king, right? That's what he wanted. And that's the story that you're hearing here. Now, the story at this point is when the Assyrian captain, Heliophanes, he has taken down a lot of these other nations, and he had finally come up to us Israelites, okay? And you got to understand that during this time, we weren't really known, right? Back in this time, the land of Israel wasn't really an established country, right? It was basically just what some outsiders would see as, a ragtag group of tribes, or a certain people, right, which came out of the Chaldeans, right? We weren't really established and that well known by the majority of the world, right? Now, some did know who we were. They did know that our God was a powerful God, but for the most part, we were loners. We kept to ourselves, right? Which is what the Lord wanted us to do, right? Hence us keeping or being holy, all right, a separated people. Well, let's go and read this chapter, and this way you get an understanding, because the point of this chapter here is what this Ammonite says is our power, and also what brings our downfall as a people, right? Because it's very important to understand these aspects, because then you'll understand why us Israelites, both the northern and the southern kingdom, why we were cursed and taken in and put into captivity, and why we lost the kingdom, but ultimately why now in these times we are turning back and we're going to ultimately regain these blessings and be put back into power. Well, let's go and read it. This is Judith chapter 5 verse 1. It says, "Then was it declared to Heliophanes, the chief captain of the armies of Assur, that the children of Israel had prepared for war, and had shut up the passages of the hill country, and had fortified all the tops of the high hills, and had laid impediments in the champion countries." Basically, impediments in the champion countries, right? We basically put roadblocks. We had taken down bridges. Basically made it hard for armies to pass through. Okay, in the lower valleys to get to us, right? And it says, verse 2, "Wherewith he was very angry, and called all the princes of Moab," right, so-called Chinese in that land, "and the captains of Ammon," the so-called Japanese, "and all the governors of the sea coast," right? Sea coast, this would be like the Tyre and the Egyptians and those people, right? Tyre being the true Africans, right? The Hamites, right? "And he said unto them, Tell me now, ye sons of Canaan, who this people is that dwelleth in the hill country, and what are the cities that they inhabit, and what is the multitude and their army, and wherein is their power and strength, and what king is set over them, or captain of their army, and why have they determined not to come and meet me more than all the inhabitants of the west?" You see this? Because what happened is, when Heliophanes had gone out with his vast army, a lot of people, a lot of these nations had gone out to basically, greet him and, throw parties and invite him in. Though he did wickedly and he destroyed them regardless, right? He was basically wondering, why were we one of the only nations who opposed him, right? Who didn't basically come down and greet him, right? Verse 5. "Then said Achior," right? Achior is this Ammonite, the captain of all the sons of Ammon, "Let my lord now hear a word from the mouth of thy servant, and I will declare unto thee the truth concerning this people, which dwelleth near thee, and inhabiteth the hill country, and there shall no lie come out of the mouth of thy servant. This people are descended of the Chaldeans," right? And see, this Achior didn't really understand where we came from, because we didn't descend from the Chaldeans. The Chaldeans are in fact the Hamites. Let's take a look at the family tree, right? When you get into right, here's Shem, right, who we descend from, and then here's Ham, right, where the so-called Africans come from. Well, Ham had Cush, right, and Cush had all these sons here, ultimately Nimrod, and from Nimrod comes the line of the Chaldeans, okay? But again, the Chaldeans ultimately reigned in Babylon. Now, if you understand the story of Shem, right, remember we have all the This yellow line follows the lineage, right? You had Terah, who was the father of Abraham, and you have Abraham, right? They dwelt in Babylon amongst the Chaldeans. So we did not descend from the Chaldeans, but we were living amongst them. Now, Achior, he didn't know that, but he said, that's why he says this people are descended of the Chaldeans. And they sojourned, therefore, in Mesopotamia, because they would not follow the gods of their fathers, which were in the land of Chaldea. For they left the way of their ancestors and worshipped the God of heaven, the God whom they knew. So they cast them out from the face of their gods, and they fled into Mesopotamia and sojourned there many days. Then their power commanded them to depart from the place where they sojourned, and to go into the land of Canaan, where they dwelt and were increased with gold and silver and with very much cattle. But when a famine covered the land of Canaan, they went down into Egypt, right? This is during the time when Joseph was in Egypt and we were invited in, and sojourned there while they were nourished, and became there a great multitude, so that one could not number their nation. Therefore the king of Egypt rose up against them and dealt subtly with them, and brought them low and with laboring and brick, and made them slaves. Then they cried unto their God, and he smote all the land of Egypt with incurable plagues, so that the Egyptians cast them out of their sight. And God dried the Red Sea before them, and brought them to Mount Sinai and Cade Barnea, and cast forth all that dwelt in the wilderness, right? And that's the story of Joshua, how he had destroyed all the Canaanite, all the ites, right, in that country, all the Hamites that were in our land, right? It says, verse 15, so they dwelt in the land of the Amorites, and they destroyed by their strength all them of Eshbon, and passing over Jordan, they possessed all the hill country, and they cast forth before them the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, and the Shechemites, and the Girgashites, and they dwelt in the country many days. And whilst they, and here it is, and whilst they sinned not before their God, they prospered, because the God that hateth iniquity was with them. You hear that? While they sinned not before their power, they prospered. That's the key right there, Hakim. Verse 17. And when they departed from the way of their which he had appointed them, they were destroyed in many battles, very sore, and were laid captives into a land that was not theirs. And the temple of their God was cast to the ground, and their cities were taken by the enemies. You see that, Hakim? So that's our downfall, and this is our rise, right? Our blessing and our curse, right? And why is that? Well, because we are the children of God. We have made a covenant with the Lord, right? And why is that? Well, that's because the Lord has been dealing with our seed line all the way back from the time of Adam. Okay, we are the descendants which the Lord has chosen, right? Which the Lord has separated us from the other nations. Hence, he has separated us. He has made us holy, right? And because we are directly his, we have certain laws and rules which we must abide by, right? Which it tells you here. Let's read that again. And while they sinned not before their God, they prospered, right? And what is sinning? Sinning is breaking the commandments of the law, okay? That is what sin. Sin is the breaking of the law, okay? So while we did not break the law, we prospered, right? But when we did not keep the ways which were appointed to us, and what was appointed to us? The laws, right? This is why not every other nation, all these other nations in the world, they can't sin, right? The majority of them can't sin, right? Because some of them do have laws that apply to like Noah and everything, but the laws which were given on Mount Sinai on the Ten Commandments by Moses, right, and the other laws that came after that, those were laws that were our laws, right? Our commandments. So hence, those are the laws that we break. If we break, we sin, right? It doesn't matter if a child of Moab or the child of Ammon breaks them, because those weren't their laws, right? So hence, they can't, because they're not their laws, right? Even these Edomites, so-called white people, that's not for them to break. They can eat all the pork they want, right? And they won't sin. They won't break a law, right? So continuing, it says, verse 19, but now are they returned to their power and are come up from the places where they were scattered and have possessed Jerusalem where their sanctuary is, and are seated in the hill country, for it was desolate. Now therefore, my Lord and Governor, if there be any error in this people, here it goes, and they sin against their power, let us consider that this shall be their ruin, and let us go up, and we shall overcome them. But if there be no iniquity in their nation, let my Lord now pass by, lest their Lord defend them, and their God be with them, and we become a reproach before all the world. So you see that, Akim? When us Israelites, when we're in the right mind, and we're doing what the Lord commands, we're blessed, and no nation can come up against us, right? They'll fall beneath our feet. But again, when we go against our Lord, when we start breaking and we have iniquity upon us, iniquity being sin upon sin, right? Then we get cursed and we get taken down, and we're easily conquered, right? And this is why our captives, these devils, these Edomites, and also the Moabites, the Persians, and all the other nations around us, man. This is why they're all our enemies, okay? This is why they cause us to sin. They put pork in everything. They put shrimp in everything, right? They cause all these different things in our reality, so we cannot keep our laws, okay? And ultimately, this is why we needed the Messiah to come and be that perfect sacrifice for us, right? So that way we could be removed from the curse of the law, right? And that way, when though we're still commanded to keep it, right? If we break the laws, we're freed from the curse of the law, right? So again, that's what the Lord has given us. Now, ultimately, we still got to play out our punishment, but as you can see, everything is crumbling in Esau's kingdom, and now we pretty much just have to wait for his kingdom to go down, right? And because again, while he's going down, us Israelites were coming up, and you could see this happening on a vast scale, right? Verse 22. And when Achor had finished these sayings, all the people standing round about the tent murmured, and the chief of the men of Heliophanes and all that dwelt in the seaside and in Moab, and spake that he should kill him, right? Because basically it was considered like rude and blasphemous that there are people that would say that Heliophanes couldn't be beaten, all right, saying that he couldn't win, right? That was considered like ludicrous, right? And all these suck-ups were basically telling Heliophanes that they should kill this Ammonite who had just told them the truth about us Israelites, right? And how ultimately, if we were good, then with our Lord, that they couldn't overcome us, that ultimately they would fall in battle, right? And then continuing, for say they, we will not be afraid of the face of the children of Israel, for lo, it is a people that have no strength nor power for a strong battle. Now therefore, Lord Heliophanes, we will go up, and they shall be a prey to be devoured of all thine army, right? And ultimately we know what happened, right? We know that eventually, when you read the book of Judith, we understand that Heliophanes lost his damn head, right? By the hands of a woman, no less, right? Judith, right? The Lord had put it on the spirit to cause Judith to go in and ultimately subtly, deceive these Assyrians. And ultimately, when she caught Heliophanes, asleep and drunken, she took action, right? By the will of the Lord, she was given the strength to do what she did. And this ultimately caused the hearts and the souls of these Assyrians to shrink. and they fled away, right? And that saved us for about another 10 years, right? We had from 75 or 735 to 722, right? Is when the Assyrians finally came back and they ultimately destroyed us, right? But again, that's where we are now, right? So let's read this. This is Baruch 1:17. For we have sinned before Yahweh, Bashem Ashai, and disobeyed him, and have not hearkened unto the voice of our Lord, our power, to walk in the commandments that he gave us openly, since the day that the Lord brought our forefathers out of the land of Egypt unto this present day. We have been disobedient unto Yahweh, Bashem Ashai, our power, and we have been negligent in not hearing his voice. Therefore the evils cleaved unto us, and the curse which Yahweh Bashem Ashai appointed by Moses, his servant, at the time that he brought our fathers out of the land of Egypt, to give us the land that floweth with milk and honey, like as it is to see this day. So you see that? So what he's talking about here is basically Deuteronomy 28 verse 15 all the way to the end. The curses that are written therein, right? All those curses, when you read those, they apply only to the Negro, Latino, Native Americans, us Israelites, okay? And why is that? Well, because we went off and we started to follow these other nations, and though we were chastened, we ultimately just kept rebelling more and more, to the point where we eventually forgot who we were, right? We went away from our heritage, which is described as what would happen to us, right? Now this namely is for the southern kingdom, but it also applies to us northern kingdom, right? This is Jeremiah 17:4. And thou, even thyself, shalt discontinue from thine heritage that I gave thee, and I will cause thee to serve thine enemies in the land which thou knowest not. For ye have kindled the fire in mine anger, which shall burn forever. And that's ultimately what happened, right? Because of our idolatry, and because of all the breaking of laws and iniquity that the northern and the southern kingdom did, we ultimately were both punished, and we were ultimately went through the same calamities, right? We were driven out separately, but now the Lord has brought us here to the other side of the world where he said he would bring us, right? And he brought it, and now he's fulfilling his word of bringing us back together. And why is that? Well, because the curses are now starting to come to an end, right? This captivity is at an end. And now that this captivity is at an end, the Lord has put it on the spirit of particular men to rise up, to retake their old spots again as being the prophets, the teachers, the leaders of Israel, to wake up our people, right? To tell our people that, hey, we're not Negro, Latino, Native Americans, that we are in fact the Israelites of the Bible. And it's time for us to wake up to our true heritage, right? That being the children of Israel, meaning that we have a heritage, we have ways that we are to live, and customs which we should keep. And ultimately we were given a special appointment upon the face of the earth, and that would be to serve and fear the Lord, okay? And why is that? Well, because by doing what we were made for, we receive blessings, and ultimately that's what we were made for, okay? And by not doing it, we could see what's going on, right? When you look at our people, our women are destroyed, our men are destroyed, right? Our leaders are a bunch of comedians and athletes and actors, right? Our people have been deceived and misled, right? By our enemies, our captors, who pretend to be our friends, right? Who in fact even think they are our friends. But you see, what's happening is that the Lord, now that our captivity is at an end, not only is he bringing the law back to us, but he's bringing back the proper understanding of how we should be conducting ourselves, right? This is Baruch 2:30. For I knew that they would not hear me, because it is a stiff-necked people. But in the land of their captivities, they shall remember themselves, right? And that goes for all of us, Negro, Latino, Native Americans, right? Not only just here in America, but all over the Americas, from southern America to Northern America, Canada, and all over the world. Because again, the Lord has scattered us all into all corners of the world, into every nation. And we're there, right? Because as long as we're not in our homeland, the land of Israel, we're in the lands of our captivity. Because all these lands which we dwell in, they're all ran by our heathen nations. There's not one country that for the most part is truly ran by us, right? Well, you know, and the thing is that, and even for the countries like Venezuela, for example, that do have somewhat, you know, control over their own land, they really don't control it because the bankers are in control of it. These other foreign heathen nations are you know, partnered up with these countries, and in fact, we ultimately don't even follow our laws. So, you know, what we're doing is we're living in iniquity, and we continue to go off, right? But again, this is, you know, that's a whole other story. But again, this lesson is to kind of gloss over our history, how we fell, how we were scattered into the rest of the world, right? And ultimately, how the Lord is going to redeem us. Because why? Because again, these curses that came upon us were only for a particular time, and now we are coming to the end of that punishment, right? This is Jeremiah 16 and 14. Therefore, behold, the days cometh, saith Yahweh Bashem Yashai, that it shall no more be said, Yahweh liveth, that brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. But Yahweh liveth, that brought up the children of Israel from the land of the north. Right? That's America. This is the great Exodus that's going to happen here in America. And from all the lands whither he had driven them, and I will bring them again into their land, and that I gave unto their fathers. Behold, I will send for many fishers, right? The many fishers is talking about people like the apostles, me, the other brothers out there who are making these lessons, going out to the streets, teaching our people, right? We're the fishers. We're the prophets out there trying to wake up and fish for our people, okay? Saith Yahweh Bashem Yashai, and they shall fish them, and after will I send for many hunters, and they shall hunt them from every mountain and from every hill and out of the holes of the rocks. For mine eyes are upon all their ways. They are not hid from my face, neither is their iniquity hid in mine eyes. So you see that, Akim? So because understand that now that we're at the end of our captivity, the Lord is going through Israel with a fine-tooth comb, and he's ultimately gathering the elect, the 1/3 of Israel that will be saved, right? That's 1 out of every 3 Negro, Latino, Native Americans, plus 144,000 elect, which the Lord is going to select to not die and perish in these end world events, which we are closely which we are quickly approaching, I should say. Okay, so again, if you're watching these videos, if you happen to stumble upon them, consider yourself lucky, man. You've stumbled upon the true narrative of the world, and now understand that it's time to wake up and get right. Because why? Because this is what's happening, man. Right? We are being tested right now to see who is right and who is going to be taken from the coming destruction. So hopefully this video was edifying, Akim. Hopefully you enjoyed the bit of history. If you have any questions, leave it down in the comments. But until then, let's give all honor, glory, and praises to Yahweh, Bashem Yahshai, Bashem Dash. Double honors my teachers, the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Peace and mercy to the elect. Shalom.